Will you pray with me? Loving and gracious God, we seek your presence now on your Spirit. Move among us, move within us. Speak to us by your voice. All, even the preacher, might hear your message this day. We pray in your Son's name, amen. This morning's gospel is one of the weirdest parables that the Gospels record. On its face, it looks like one that should go not only against what Jesus' society stood for, and many of his parables do that, but also what Jesus stood for. It tells of a manager who hears a negative report about his steward. Upon hearing the report, he tells the steward to give an account because he is being fired. In response, the steward, who doesn't want to engage in any physical labor, calls in clients of the manager, calls in clients of the landowner, and has them change what they owe him, essentially cheating his master out of goods due to him. And for all of his cheating, the manager is lauded by his master, the landowner, and maybe even gets to keep his job. The text isn't really clear about that. Jesus, saying cheating is a good thing. See what I mean? It's weird. It doesn't fit. It sticks out like a sore thumb. Even Luke doesn't seem to know what to do with it, but adds all these caveats and comments at the end, trying to make sense of this parable. And yet, if we don't believe that Jesus was just off his rocker for a moment, if we do believe that Jesus' teachings usually fit together in some sort of way, well, then we have to dig deeper. We have to look closer and see what might actually be behind this parable. This morning, I turn to the Reverend Brian McLaren, and some words of his I heard this week online and read elsewhere about online. Because Reverend McLaren maintains the reason this parable is so confusing to us is that we are missing the context. Let me tell you what he means. Largely because of other parables, we often read this parable as if the manager were good and gracious, as if in fact he were a stand-in for God. That's what happens in the prodigal son story after all, so why not this one? So they follow each other? But what if that's not true? What if that's not the way we should read this parable at all? In Roman times, only about 10% of the population, at most, was even what we would call middle class. Most of them, 90% or more, were in abject poverty. Give us this day our daily bread is not a euphemism. It's what they prayed for. A daily source of nourishment. Because they didn't know they get it. Most people, in fact, and many of them Romans in ancient Palestine, lived at the very top. There was actually very little true middle class. It was mostly the super wealthy and the devastatingly poor. Most of the wealthy in Palestine were Romans, or Roman patrons, and they didn't even live near the land that they owned. They instead got wealth off of it from the collecting of taxes due from it. And they taxed the land as deeply as they could, extracting as much wealth as possible from the land that they owned, caring little, if at all, for the well-being or health of those who worked for them. It was an unjust and unfair system, and intentionally so. So what if the landowner in this story, the rich man in this parable, was actually like most landowners in Jesus' day? What if he were a rich man pillaging his people, grinding them up just to make as much money as possible? How might that change our perception of the story? how we understand this parable. Now hold that thought. There's one more bit of context that's important to know. Stewards or managers of the landowners were the people who lived there, and they were the ones who collected the taxes, collected the items for sale. And in Jesus' day, they received their salary by overcharging the official fee. That was their salary, where they got their money from. So if the landowner wanted 50 barrels, they would charge 80 barrels. The 30 barrels that was left was how they got their income. Think of it as a markup in a store. The store, after all, only makes a profit by buying X product for X money and then selling it to you or to me for this much. This is the profit between. Except a whole lot less just and fair than simply a retail store. Because stewards made their profit already with an unjust, unfair system. At the same time, here's the unjust part again, they were expected to get as much out of the land as possible, to squeeze every last bit out of the people, because their absentee landowners cared only about money, not about those people. So knowing these two things, what's going on in this parable? We have the rich man, who is rich only because of the way he participates in the completely unjust system that Rome established. We have the steward or manager, who is suddenly brought in for squandering the property. Now this could mean the manager was indeed cheating the rich man, or it could simply mean that the manager wasn't getting enough from the land for the landowner's preferences. That he wasn't squeezing the populace hard enough to get every last cent out of them. We don't actually know. And either way, the manager was about to be fired. Despite what we can assume several years of faithful service, he is about to be out the door and on the street to be a part of that 90% in abject poverty. And in that moment, he sees how very little he means to his master, how very little he means to the rich man. He is merely a cog in the wheel he means to an end. He will have no time to plead his case. Give an account because you cannot manage for me anymore is a pretty clear-cut statement saying the case has been decided. Instead, he will be quickly cast aside and replaced. So what should he do? In the words of McLaren, he changes sides. He goes to the ones who are being oppressed by the system and does them a favor. He lowers how much they have to pay, cuts the costs they were going to be giving, and for at least a little bit of time makes their struggle for their daily bread that much simpler. Now I am willing to argue that you cannot actually cheat an unjust system, but a system that makes its money by grinding people into the dust cannot be cheated because it's not the way the world works. But actually, I'm not sure the manager in this case is even trying to do that. Remember, his salary is from the overcharge. He gets paid. His resources are the money that the landowner didn't even want, or most of the products, the goods. In all likelihood, the relief given to the tenants is from his salary, his resources. He's not even cheating the manager. He's simply using his resources to fight the system. The manager knows that he can't alone change this unjust system, and he has no real chance, so he thinks, of keeping his job. But he can make friends. He can use whatever resources he has to fight the system, to change a little bit of the system, to care for and help those trapped in the poverty of his society. It is, I believe, for this act of justice that Jesus commends him, not because he was acting in fraudulent ways. He was not rewarded for cheating. He was rewarded and lauded for opening his eyes to the fact that people matter more than money. As Jesus says in the verses after the parable, we only get to have one thing as our first priority: money or God, mammon or people. The steward at long last made his choice. Money would not be his priority. People would. When you hear the parable like that, and again, much to McLaren's helps to hear that parable like that, it's not one that stands against what Jesus teaches. It's not one that sticks out like a sore thumb, but one instead that lies well within his usual teachings and focus. And as we look at the parable with this view of it and with this context, well, the call to us in the parable seems pretty clear, doesn't it? We are to work like the steward did to care for others, to abandon and even work against systems that oppress, that keep people in their place. We're to take the side of the least of these, the downtrodden, the marginalized or ignored. We are to advocate for the immigrant, for the poor, for the working single parent. We are to argue for access to those things that are needed for a full life in our society: a home, health care, good food, the ability to get an education, child care. We're to use our resources to help even in the symptoms of those systems by giving to food pantries and safe passage to other places. We, like the manager, are called to choose the side of those who need our hands and feet. And not because we just need friends like the manager did, but because that's who Jesus was friends with. And that's who Jesus calls us to be friends with. It was just a few weeks ago, the lectionary had a passage that invited us to invite to our banquets, to our dinner tables, to our picnics in the park, those who could never afford to invite us back, those who couldn't possibly give us a similar invitation. Because the point of those invitations should be to reach out to others and to grow the community, to help as needed, and to share our resources with all, not a score invitation to our own free lunch or party. This parable is what that invitation looks like in practice. It is the manager using his own funds to help people who his own hopes aside are not really going to be able to help him when the time comes. Remember, daily bread is not a euphemism. They don't got bread to share. He's helping them anyway. Because in reaching out, he begins to change the system and build a community that reflects, or so Jesus tells us, the kingdom of God. This building, this reaching out, is what Jesus commends in this parable. It's what he tells us the parable is about. This building, this reaching out, is what Jesus commands us to do. Because that's our job as well. And here's some good news. The parable is not clear, as I alluded to already, whether or not the manager loses his job. It has some words at the end when he's commended by his rich landowner that suggest maybe he actually doesn't in the long run. We don't know. But I like to think that he did. That in claiming his own power for justice, his own power to do good on behalf of others, the steward, the manager, was able to impress even the landowner, the rich man. That he was able to claim his power and, well, not starve while doing so. Our promise is much more direct. The parable's a little wishy-washy about the fate of the steward, but God promises us this. When we seek to care for the least of these, when we do the kingdom work of justice, righteousness, and shalom, we are promised by God that those ways will prevail. That we're doing God's work and God will bring it to fruition. We're doing the mission of God with our God. do it alone. The steward could not change the system. He could just change a small part of it and manage its symptoms. But God has promised us a new system, a new way of being in the world. We strive to bring it into being through our lives. We're promised that it's God who finishes the work. God who brings the kingdom of God into place in eternity. We're promised our efforts are not for naught, but are part of the work, the ongoing work of our Creator. So was the steward rewarded for cheating? No. He was lauded, rewarded for serving others, for using his resources for the least of these, for taking up the cause of the poor, for becoming the steward that changed sides. May we find similar goals. May we always find ourselves on the side of Jesus. May we always find ourselves on the side of love. Amen.